Woe to the shepherds of Israel who have been feeding themselves. Shouldn't the shepherds feed their flock? You eat the fat, wear the wool, and butcher the fattened animals, but you do not tend the flock. Lack intimacy in these kinds of relationships, you run the risk of developing false intimacy. And so Jesus is this shepherd, this good shepherd. He leads us to intimate relationships that are safe, that are developing. We get to eat in pastures together. We get to drink water together. This is our communion.
Hey, I want to thank you personally for joining in on our channel. If you're a subscriber, that's awesome. Continue to come back. We've got great material and content for you that will help you grow in your walk in life in Christ. If you're not, I'd like to challenge you to hit the subscribe button and check the notifications so that weekly you'll get notified of our sermons and other teachings that we will have on here. I hope that you will continue to follow us. And if you're not in our area, please continue to attend the church that you regularly attend and support your local church. If you're in our area in Columbus, Kansas, we would love to have you. We have hours of service on Sundays. At 8:15 is our contemporary service, and 10:40 is our service for traditional style. If you want Sunday school, we have Sunday school at 9:30. Come and fellowship with us. See what God can do in your life.
Have you ever worked under a subpar leader or a boss? Or maybe you had an absentee boss. I mean, you work every day, you show up 9 to 5 or whatever your hours are, and your boss, well, he doesn't seem to be there. You know, like maybe his office door's shut, he never comes out for anything, or he works from home, but you got to do all the work there in the office, and when it's conflict time, somebody else's problem, not his. And you end up just kind of like, and you wonder why you're there. I had somebody kind of like that I worked under when I was in my mid-20s. I worked for Whole Foods back in New Jersey. I was a butcher apprentice. I didn't do a lot of butchering. I did a lot of selling. But this boss would just kind of, he'd start the shift, the same shift that I did, and then he would escape down to his little office in the basement area, and I'd never see him again. And then when somebody would need a special thing cut, like fillets, I don't know if you've ever trimmed your own fillets, but those are actually extremely difficult to trim. That's why they're the most expensive when you buy them at a butcher shop. Or if you needed like a bone-in ribeye, you have to cut those with a specific band saw. And I was not trained to do that. So I'd have to go find him. 9 out of 10 times, I could never find him, not even in his office. So I'd have to go and get the cook who was working in the kitchen to come out and do the butchering for me. And it was just never, ever a good time. And so he would say something kind of like in our meetings, I put my time in. I did my work already, so I could be where I'm at. It's your turn to put your time in. And it never set well with me when he said that. And I've worked with a couple other bosses who maybe they haven't quite said that, but their attitude's the same. And it just, puts a bad taste in your mouth. And here's the thing. Sometimes this happens within relationships too. Sometimes you are with somebody as a friend or even a family member or even sadly as a spouse, and they go, I've already put my time in, the honeymoon's over, let's just coaster until the end. And it's sad because I think that's why more and more people younger than my generation are turning to things like AI for comfort. They want a fake thing to give them a real relationship. Or they get lost in TV and video games or movies until they can find something that they think will fill that void of intimacy that they are missing. And when I say intimacy, I'm not talking about just specifically between a husband and a wife. I'm talking intimacy in a relationship. Jonathan and David had that kind of intimacy, and they were guys. They were best friends, and they had an intimacy that far surpasses anything I've ever seen in a day-to-day relationship of a human being today. The thing is, loss of intimacy can lead to falsehoods in relationships, and it leads to danger. But there's good news that I want to give you today. We've got somebody who has modeled and pictured for us what intimacy in a relationship really looks like. And today, we're going to see that. Because we're going to find out what is so good about the Good Shepherd and how his goodness gives us that intimacy we need in relationships. So if you want to begin turning to John 10, we're going to work through 11, and then we'll go through verse close to 18. And I'll set the stage for you. Back in chapter 9, Jesus heals this guy of his blindness. And then the Pharisees step in and they go, who healed you? And this episode, when Jesus heals him, he doesn't know who healed him. Doesn't get Jesus' name, doesn't even really see him exactly. And so they interview him because he was supposedly born blind. And the Pharisees don't accept this. And so it turns into this long fight. He gets interviewed twice. His parents get interviewed. And then at the end, the Pharisees look at this young man and they essentially say, you were healed by a sinner. You do not belong in the synagogue. Get out. And so as he's leaving, that's what we call excommunication. He is literally kicked out of synagogue. He cannot attend synagogue anywhere else. He is officially kicked out from worship in God's services. And he leaves, and he sees Jesus, and he doesn't recognize that Jesus is the one that heals him, and he kind of has a bump-in relationship with him. And Jesus goes, do you believe in the Son of God now? And he goes, if you will show me him, yes. And he says, I am he. And he realizes that's the same one that healed him. And then the Pharisees that were there followed up. They hear this interaction. And Jesus says something very interesting to them. He says, the blind get judged for being blind. So those who think they see are actually blind. And those who are blind actually see. And so we read here in John, it's 9:39. He says, I came into this world for judgment in order that those who do not see will see, and those who do see will become blind. And this makes the Pharisees mad. And this is where we pick up, where he starts the very next thing in chapter 10, where he says, truly I tell you, anyone who doesn't enter the sheep by the gate, but climbs in some other way, is a thief and a robber. And so this is where we start to pick up on Jesus as the good shepherd. So if we look down here and jump into verse 11, it reads like this. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. Now, what does Jesus mean by good, though? Have you ever read that and wondered, what exactly is good? Because in our idea, good is just opposite of bad. You do good things. Well, the word actually means two things. It can be good and it can be beautiful. That's what's fun about Greek. Sometimes they mean different things. And so you have to wonder, with John's writing especially, he loves to do this a lot. He loves to use a single word that means multiple things. And so Jesus is saying the good shepherd. Well, it doesn't mean a morally good exactly. What it means is quality. When he says the good shepherd, he means quality of goodness. It's how he is good. And then when he could look at it and see it's beautiful, it's the attractiveness of Jesus as the true shepherd, the real shepherd. So you're looking at it, and this word means both things. It's how he's good, and it's the attractiveness that leads you to him as the good, true shepherd. So notice the other thing here, that what makes him good is the second half of that verse, where he says that he lays down his life for the sheep. There's a little explanation of a shepherd needed to be done here. Imagine yourself in ancient Palestine, and you're not a shepherd, you're just a regular person, and you see them out in the field in the country, and you wonder, what do they do? This is what they do. They take sheep from the sheep pen, and they take them out to pastures to feed them. And then they take them to areas to water them. And then they take them back to the sheep pen and let them sleep. Do you know where the shepherd will sleep sometimes when he is protecting the sheep? He sleeps in the gateway. He lays his body down in front of the sheep pen entrance to be the protective barrier. Now, it actually was also uncommon for a shepherd to die for their sheep back then, because you wanted your shepherd to live so he could continue protecting the sheep. But Jesus says he's the shepherd who will die for his sheep. Again, he contrasts himself from everything else around him. He is vastly different, And so he is now making remarks that remind us, if we were there, if we were sitting there listening to this interaction happening between Jesus, this former blind man, and these Pharisees, and we hear this, our mind would immediately run to Ezekiel 34, where we read 1 through 6. Set some context up for you for this. Israel is taken away and in exile at this time. This chapter explains why. Israel used to see their kings as shepherds. And so God makes a comment and a judgment on the house of David, the Israelite kings. And this is what he says. The word of the Lord came to me, that's Ezekiel. Son of man, prophesy against the shepherds of Israel, the kings, the leaders. Prophesy and say to them, this is what the Lord God says to the shepherds. Woe to the shepherds of Israel who have been feeding themselves. Shouldn't the shepherds feed their flock? You eat the fat, wear the wool, and butcher the fattened animals. But you do not tend the flock. You have not strengthened the weak, healed the sick, bandaged the injured, brought back the strays, or sought the lost. Instead, you have ruled them with violence and cruelty. They were scattered for lack of a shepherd. They became food for all the wild animals when they were scattered. My flock went astray. My flock went astray. That's God. On all the mountains and every high hill. My flock was scattered over the whole face of the earth, and there was no one searching or seeking for them. And here's Jesus talking with Pharisees. Guess who he's making them out to feel like? These bad shepherds. Because what's the next thing that we see? We jump in verse 12, and it reads like this in John. The hired hand, since he is not the shepherd and doesn't own the sheep, leaves them and runs away when he sees a wolf coming. The wolf then snatches and scatters them. This happens because he is a hired hand and doesn't care about the sheep. Instead of doing what they were called to do, feeding the sheep, protecting the sheep, organizing the sheep, having intimacy with the sheep, instead, they sought for themselves to the point that they kicked out the one sheep from the pen. But the good news is here. We see it in Ezekiel 34:23, where it basically tells us that God is the actual shepherd. And he's going to herd his flock into a united flock under one shepherd, who will be a descendant of the son of David. Which is again where we pick up one more time in verse 14. Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, I lay down my life for the sheep. Notice again what is going on here. Jesus is saying he's the good shepherd. Notice how he is the good shepherd. He's good because he knows his sheep. He has intimacy with the sheep. And he's able to have that intimacy because he has that intimacy with the Father. And so because they have intimacy together, he knows how to have intimacy with his sheep, his flock, his people, and his friends around him. He's also good because he lays down his life. It's sacrificial. Jesus goes on to say in verse 17, this is why the Father loves me, because I lay down my life so that I may take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down on my own. You might have heard people running around and saying the Jews are the ones that killed Jesus. And you might have heard others saying the Romans killed Jesus. Jesus tells us exactly right there who killed Jesus. Jesus gave his life up. No one took it from him. He gave it up. And then he picks it right back up again. That's how he's the good shepherd. And it's because he loves the Father. And it's because he sees the Father doing just the same thing. Who or what are the wolves that are coming into your lives? What sheep pen are you in? If Jesus is our true and good shepherd, what wolves do we have to fear? For some of you, it's your lack of intimacy in a relationship. And I'm not going to say that I know that for sure. For some, it's a lack of intimacy in your relationship with Christ. This can be relationships that are marital. These can be relationships that are friendships. These can even be familial relationships. Father to son, daughter to mother, mother-in-law to son-in-law. No, vice versa. When you lack intimacy in these kinds of relationships, you run the risk of developing false intimacy. And when there's false intimacy, then you give in to wolves that sneak in. And then you're no longer in the sheep pen of Christ, but you're in the sheep pen of a world that wants to devour you, wants to eat you. This causes you and others in your relationship to not be in a safe place. And suddenly the person you thought you knew no longer seems to be who you thought they were. Trust gets broken. Confidence is slipped. And then connection's gone. And this is why intimacy is so essential. Jesus was intimate with the Father. There's this level of love that rolls around within the Godhead. And then it spills out and pours over us. And that's why we can see when David wrote Psalm 23, he says this in verses 1 through 4, "The Lord is my shepherd. I have what I need. He lets me lie down in the green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He renews my life. He leads me along the right paths for his name's sake. Even when I go through the darkest valley, I fear no danger, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me." And so Jesus is this shepherd, this good shepherd. He leads us to intimate relationships that are safe, that are developing. We get to eat in pastures together. We get to drink water together. This is our communion. We get to enjoy that unity together. It's kind of like a story I want to tell you. In World War I, some Turkish soldiers were trying to steal at night a flock of sheep from a herder. And the shepherd woke up hearing what was going on. And knowing he couldn't physically get his sheep back, he called out to them. And as they were being herded away, they heard his voice. And they turned around and came down the ravine, turned around and came right back to him. And we see this in John 10:4, where Jesus says, "My sheep know my voice." So when Jesus calls us in these moments of false intimacies and not safe places, we hear it and we turn around and we come back. And we establish true intimacy. Let me end with 1 Peter 4:8 through 11. Where he says, "Above all, maintain constant love for one another. Since love covers a multitude of sins, be hospitable to one another without complaining. Just as each one has received a gift, use it to serve others, a good stewards of the varied grace of God. If anyone speaks, let it be as one who speaks God's words. If anyone serves, let it be from the strength of God provides them, so that God may be glorified through Jesus Christ in everything. To him be the glory and the power forever and ever. Amen." Love covers a multitude of sins. That's the symbol of intimacy in our lives, within each other's relationships, between marriages, between friendships, between families. Love covers a multitude of sins. So what would it look like if we as a church lived out our intimacy through Jesus as the Good Shepherd, following his direction so when he calls out, we go? What would that look like? Our community would be changed, I think. We would change our families. Sons would return to fathers, daughters to mothers. Broken friendships would be restored, marriages made whole, all done within this church and in our community because of the intimacy we have with each other. This is how we would be living in the intimacy given through the death and the resurrection of Jesus.